I'm very excited about this series that we're launching this semester. It's a public-facing component of my diversity in higher education course. So happy to share this piece of the course and our incredible guest speakers with the public. Dr. Lori Patton Davis is one of the most highly respected, accomplished scholars in the field of higher education. So Professor Patton Davis is best known for her important interdisciplinary scholarship on African Americans in higher education, critical race theory, campus diversity initiatives on college campuses, girls and women of color in educational and social contexts, and college student development and graduate preparation. She is a past president of the Association for the Study of Higher Education. She's the author of over 50 peer-reviewed journal articles, which makes me feel like a bum, like I need to stop this webinar immediately and go write something. So 50 journal articles. Her research has been cited in nearly 5,000 published studies. So to get some context for everybody, like why do people name these numbers and things like that, what this all means is she's highly influential. Scholars across the country and policy leaders in the US and abroad read her work and seek her expertise. And that is why we are extremely privileged to have her spend time with us at the University of South Carolina, talking today about anti-Black racism and reimagining whiteness in the struggle for racial equity. Dr. Patton Davis is one of the dopest scholars I know. She is my friend, my comrade in the struggle, and a constant source of inspiration for me as a Black lady scholar and professor. So thank you, Dr. Patton Davis, for joining us.
Thank you for having me. You forgot soror.
Yes, and soror. Yeah, so shouts to all the deltas in the audience. So let's just jump into it. You know that I'm a cultural scholar, right? So for me, everything I do begins and ends with culture, our families, our communities, our music, all of it matters for me. Yes. So let's start at the beginning. Before becoming a scholar, tell me a little about where you're from, your upbringing, and how that matters to you. Like, how has your cultural and community experience influenced who you are professionally?
Oh, goodness. So before I even go there, I do want to thank you again for inviting me. I think doing this is just such a wonderful idea. I hope other scholars model this for their classes.
Thank you.
I was born and raised in East St. Louis, Illinois. And I say that with a lot of pride. And I've always said it with a lot of pride, but I think I didn't realize that I wasn't supposed to say it with pride until I got into graduate school and everybody had read Savage Inequalities and had, come up with this narrative, about what East St. Louis is and, what the education is and what the people from East St. Louis are like. But I grew up with, a wonderful set of parents, and I was the youngest of 3 girls, and my father had a military background. He was in the Air Force. And what was really important for me as I think about what shaped me becoming a scholar is that my parents never expected anything other than excellence from me and my sisters. Like, it was an expectation. And I remember this from a very young age. So they didn't expect anything less. And if we came with anything less, I mean, they gave us the business, right? And so, and in addition to that, just having a large extended family. So my mother was from St. Louis, my father from Brooklyn, New York. And, this notion of excellence was just something that ran through the family. Not a perfect family. I don't think any family is perfect, but in terms of what has contributed to me becoming a scholar, it was the family experiences. It was also being in schools where all of my teachers were Black, right? I never felt like I didn't matter. that my voice didn't matter. I knew about respect. Again, just growing up in a community where there are expectations, even though this community is sort of forgotten, within the larger landscape of Illinois or, within our country. But it was always around high expectations, doing the very best. And really, although we didn't use the language at the time, it was about doing it for the culture. You got to make your family proud. They're pouring all of their resources into you. And so that's the background that I think has shaped me. And I think the other piece that shaped me into really thinking about things really differently. Some people think it's, interesting. When I grew up, the roles were sort of reversed. So my father did all the cooking. My father did a lot of the things that are considered more domestic in nature. But he taught my sisters and I about what we should expect in a partner. That we don't have to be defined by these societal constraints that say, women belong in the kitchen, or, women do the cooking. He's the one who took us to basketball games and, cheerleading, all of these things. And so in many ways, I think he modeled a more progressive form of masculinity. And so when I think about the work that I do as a scholar, I don't just look at things because society says, no, it goes this way. You look at it this way. And so it's things like that, I think, growing up that have shaped my scholarly interest. And then just having grown up in a school that didn't have the resources. We were resource rich in terms of love and caring and those sorts of things, but not in terms of money. And so it's interesting to kind of be reared in an educational system that that has been under-resourced, not because the people are bad or whatever, there wasn't anything we did, but that there just wasn't a care for, this predominantly Black city, in Southern Illinois. So it took some time, in terms of growing up to learn, like, what's the language? Like, I know what this is, but I didn't know that it was called inequity, right? I didn't know it was called injustice. I didn't know it was called disposability. And so now as a scholar, when I write, it's helpful to have some language to sort of articulate those experiences to others so that they understand that we don't blame people for their predicament in a society that sort of has coerced them, into that, and that has situated them in that way.
Yeah, it's such a testimony to our parents, our families, those teachers in those schools. When you look at what their students and their children have been able to go on to do without all that stuff.
Right.
So I want to loosely base our conversation today on your work, Dear White People, Reimagining Whiteness in the Struggle for Racial Equality. And, this is a particular article, I know you do a lot of work around it, but it's a particular article that you wrote some time ago, but unfortunately it's still relevant. Not much has changed. But in this particular article, it's a co-written article, and you and the co-author began with Derek Bell's call for a white leader, or the type of white leader, who is able to free white people of racism. And I think that's really, really interesting, talking about that type of leadership. So talk a little bit more about this. What kind of leadership does that involve among white people? And what does that look like in terms of like real concrete action?
Oh, goodness. So first, shout out to Dr. Chayla Haynes, who was my co-author. But so when we wrote this piece and thought about, writing about whiteness, we came from a perspective of two Black women who are often, we're sought out as consultants, sought out for advice on how do you address, racial injustice, all these pieces. And the reality, or I guess the struggle with all of this, is that that's really not our role. right? Like, I think, you know, Black people and maybe especially Black women are expected to save people. And what I appreciated about Derek Bell's work, and, you know, what really inspired this piece is that, you know, it's really not about, you know, Black people rushing to save white people and give them advice. Like, white people need to save white people, right? And here's how you do it. And part of that is not expecting us to do it. And so when I think about a white leader who engages in this work, it really is important for them to understand like who they are as white people, to understand the process of colonization and how it's sort of situated in the domination and dominating Black people, Black bodies, all of these other pieces. And so any white leader who's going to engage in that work and do it really authentically will probably need to have a moment with themselves around who they are as white people, how they're complicit. This doesn't mean that it changes systems or, you know, it shifts anything, but you can't enter into this work thinking, you know, that you can address anything when you haven't done your own work. And that's the thing, you know, as a white person, you need to do your own work. I can't save you, you know, you can't save them like that. I'm more invested in supporting Black people and trying to help us undo or unlearn some of the things that we've learned and work toward our own liberation. I don't
We
have
have
the
work.
right. I don't have the bandwidth to save white people. Now I do have ideas and how I think about it, but I want white people to do that. And I think there are some white people who have tried to do this, but there's like a catch-22. Like you can't be white and do this work without also being critiqued for doing the work. And being critiqued for the way you do the work. But I think as a white person committed to this, all the critiques and all these other pieces should just be, you know, on the peripheral if your commitment is true. And one of the things that I've learned, and I kind of saw it during the White Racial Literacy Project that I started at IUPUI, is that white people need spaces to unlearn and undo and work on their own stuff. And they don't need me there or anybody else. Like work on your stuff. And let us do our thing. And so that's when I think about a leader, it's somebody who has the capacity to say it. Like we need to do work. Here's, you know, some ideas for how we can do this, and be okay with the pushback and being okay with being perceived as a race traitor and being perceived as, you know, being imperfect and all these other pieces that, you know, we all know white supremacy is real seductive, right? It makes white people feel like they're perfect or whatever. But I think a white leader who is going to lead other white people has got to do some self-work, and then have the ability to, you know, help those around them come into that same space.
Yeah, it takes some thick skin. I was often baffled by like looking at particularly at senior levels, like vice presidents of student affairs, et cetera, who would be in sheer terror having to face students at like a town hall or, you know what I'm saying, or something like that. And it's like, you're scared?
Right.
That's been like called the N-word walking around campus and you're scared? You're scared of them?
Right. We don't have a choice but to have thick skin all day, every day. Yeah. Like you can have it for this. And so
being brave. Yeah. One of the things last week, we began this class last week, and I started it by sharing with them a clip from, I think it was an ACPA like YouTube video, and with like Jamie Washington and Patty Perilla from University of Maryland, and on that clip, Patty was talking about the need to have space for people at these senior levels to do their work, like, and to recognize that they need some spaces to learn and to not be so careful and scared to really put themselves out there, that they don't
Mm-hmm.
grow and develop in some way because they're always being watched. So sometimes,
Right.
Outwardly on campus, it doesn't feel, there's no such thing as safe, but it doesn't feel,
Mm-hmm.
necessarily like a safe space, but that we need to have some space. We need to create something.
It has to
So,
be.
so talk about this. What you said something about, because one of my students had a question about viable ideas, and you mentioned a project that you created, white racial literacy. Tell us about that.
So that was a project. It was funded by the Lumina Foundation and supported by IUPUI. But the whole purpose of that was to, facilitate opportunities for white people to talk to white people about racism, racial injustice, how they're complicit, all these pieces, and to, remove this, feelings of guilt because people of color in the room, and like to really let them have the space to do it, and to hear from white people who were not perfect, who were still, going through the motions, but were willing to have the conversation. That's what that project was about. And, you can imagine trying to implement that on the campus, and the pushback from people who are part of the campus. Overall, I think it was a really great project, by no means perfect, but it did at least reveal to me, and at some point I want to write about it, the level of resistance. Like, the resistance is out there, but the ways that you see it, they're really interesting. And it's hard to implement a project like that at a predominantly white institution where the structures in and of themselves, don't allow for, such a project. I think, the leadership was really supportive, but the reality of it is, how do you try to do work around undoing white supremacy in a structure that's built on white supremacy, right? So you anticipate all of these things that are, going to happen. But I think I always go back to the third piece that Bell talks about in that article is, the struggle for racial justice is pretty much a wash, but it's still worth fighting for.
Yeah.
And so, that was, one contribution. And I will say I was conflicted at times in doing that project, because I kept wondering, like, I just want to go do my research on Black women, support Black women, do Blacks in higher ed. And I alone can't save white people. And that was, I didn't want to do any sessions. I didn't want to do it. I didn't want to be in the front of that. The goal was for white colleagues who were willing to be in that with me, to kind of lead the way. So we got good feedback, but I mean, it was a real struggle.
Yeah, as it always is. I mean, it's a taxing. It's a lot. It's a lot. It's a lot to experience these things, but it's also a lot to as joyful as it is to see ideas come to fruition, and to try to create service opportunities and everything for educational opportunities for our campuses and for the people around us. It's still exhausting. Yeah,
It's exhausting. Yes. And
So,
it was deciding on what thing I really wanted to be exhausted on. Do I want to be exhausted dealing with, white people who don't want to change? Do I want to devote my energy to the ones who are willing to, be in the conversation? So yeah, lots of feelings about that.
Yeah. You also talk about in this work the idea of whiteness being invisible. And that one particularly stands out for me. Many years ago, I wrote this article, and the title was "Snow is Only White in Our Imagination." And I talk about my work with white college students around cultural and racial identity, and getting them to wrestle, with their own cultural and racial identity through a cultural leadership course. But I compare it to the idea of snow, and how in our imagination and how we paint snow in pictures and everything is always, white and fluffy. But the reality is, when you live in a snow state, that maybe the first day is white, but
right.
but then it turns gray and
Right.
dark and dirty and everything, because people live in it and walk through it, and cars drive through it. Life happens to it. right? And no one is blank, right?
Right.
We all have experiences, and so this, there is no such thing as this whiteness as a blank slate. And in this piece, you say that racially minoritized people see whiteness every day. And whether white people see it or not, that minoritized people see it every day. And so before I ask you to speak a little bit more on that, I just want to, for people, because we have such a broad range of folks sitting in on the class, the word minoritized, we're saying minoritized rather than minority, because it is a situation, not a kind of a value of a person, right? So when you use the word minority, that denotes a level of importance, right? So when you think about the best example is in college, like we're in higher education. So in higher education and college, you have a major and you have a minor. And which one is the most important? The major, right? The minor is just kind of like an afterthought. There's a weight of importance that comes with those two words, and you don't want to apply that to people. So people aren't really minorities, but they are, or minor, but they have been treated and put in situations where they're treated in a minoritized way, right? So I just wanted to give some clarity for that and these terms that we use. Right. But talk to us a little bit about how folks see whiteness and why that's so important to state explicitly.
Because I think when people think about whiteness, they think about normalcy, think about it as just the everyday, something that we don't see. And it is every day, but if you are a racially minoritized person, I think it is in clearer view. So not just seeing white people, but seeing whiteness everywhere. I mean, we're on a white man's internet right now, like we are, it's kind of everywhere. And while, I'm not thinking about whiteness or white people 24/7, I am conscious of the fact that it's there. I'm conscious of where I purchased a home. I'm conscious of the fact that some of my neighbors may not are surprised that I could afford the house, or, I'm conscious of the local schools, and I know that they're not predominantly Black, they're predominantly white, so there are a lot of things that I do just on a daily basis. And I know that the reality is, somebody might look at me weird, or I might, begin to feel like I don't belong, or, any number of things. There's so many, right? But it's, part of our language. It's in APA, like, it's everywhere. And we see it because we sort of deal with the material consequences of it and realize that, the way we live our lives, or the fact that we're minoritized, allows white people to live the way that they live, right? Because there has to be this.
Because we're pushed so far over, and it gives them so much room.
Right, just spread all the way out, right? But, the other piece around this, which is interesting, so when you talk about how this shows up in the classroom, I've done activities with students and, asked them to think about their identities. And you have white students who are like, I'm from Kentucky, and all of those, that's fine. But for them, they're not forced to really think about a racial identity. They're not forced to think about how whiteness shapes how they understand what it means to be white. And whether, and I think the other piece is that to not identify as white, or to try to, or to fail to really grapple with whiteness, it allows a lot of white people to fly up under the radar, right? And be perceived as good people, because when you're talking about white people, you're talking about bad people, or, so I think there are all of these reigning discourses around whiteness that don't really allow, well, I won't even say it doesn't allow white people to see it, but it does allow them to engage in willful ignorance of it, right? You don't have to see it. Or I can say something happened to me and you can enter into that conversation and say, well, no, maybe it was this. You know what I'm saying? It's like
Yeah.
almost trying to deny an experience just to maintain whiteness. And so that's what I mean. There's the more concrete way that we understand whiteness, and we see it, but there are all of these abstract constructions of whiteness that are all around us.
Yes.
And I'm just aware of them. How can you not be? And that doesn't mean that every person of color, every racially minoritized person gets it, but you know, for those who say they don't get it, they tripping. Like they tripping for real. Oh no,
Yeah.
you cannot see it.
But and that goes back to the work that you're saying, the other work that needs to be done, because there's so many people within the minoritized group that we have that need work, that need the work and the education and the learning and the development and and everything.
And they need, and I think there's a way to come to understand and learn about whiteness that, it may cause feelings of shame and guilt and all of this other stuff, but I'm talking about the kind of work that gets you past that. Because
Yeah.
to be stuck in shame and guilt means you're centering whiteness, right? Not centering what you do about it.
Yeah.
And so those are the kind of, educative spaces that I would love for white people to engage in, and not expect me to plan it and all these other pieces, but you do it.
Mm-hmm.
We all got access to Google and can
Yeah.
look up ideas.
Yeah. I mean, which is what, to be honest, I can speak just from my own experience as a Black person. We've been doing that for years. So we were educated in the same school systems that didn't teach about Black people. And so much of what Black people learned about themselves, or about Blackness, about Black history, they learned themselves. Like, right? It was Carter G. Woodson.
Listen,
Every man has two educations, one that's given to
okay.
him, the one that he gives himself.
And here's the thing, I was talking with Taylor earlier today about this. And I was like, you know what, to me, it's like a little bit of a slave mentality, right? I think some white people are really caught up in the dynamics of white supremacy so much that they don't realize that it hurts them. It hurts those around them. And when we talk about a slave mentality for Black people, it is catering to this white ideology or whatever. But I don't think we're alone. Some people who are in that space, or what is a sunken place now, right? Not slave mentality. But again, it's seductive, it is comfortable, it's all of these pieces. And there's another way to be. And that was the hope of that article, to help, or to contribute to, let's reimagine what whiteness is. It doesn't have to be what minoritized people experience it as, but it also doesn't have to be what white people experience it as.
Yeah. It's hard stuff, but it's also invigorating to elevate your thinking, like to learn new things, and even to look back at yourself like, oh, I can't believe, like all of us hopefully do that. And so it's an important thing. So I want to move into some of the questions that my students had. Paige Finney asks, were you ever uncomfortable addressing white people about their whiteness and the institutional racism that's involved because of whiteness? And if so, like, how did you overcome that?
To me, there's never comfort in talking about whiteness. But like, I think talking about it is inherently uncomfortable. Like, I'm talking about a system that has, historically and in current context, marginalized, killed, people who look like me. And so to me, there's never comfort in it, and when I'm in spaces and I'm talking to white people, there's no comfort in it. Part of the comfort is, will they get it? Am I wasting my time? Which is why, like, at this point, you got to pay me. Like, I can't, no more freebies, right? If I'm going to go, because it's it is emotional to talk about it, because I am talking about something that is systemically harming my family, my community. And so I can talk about it and I can do academic speak all day. I'm comfortable in that. I know that, but the feeling, the emotionality of it is never comfortable to me. But in terms of feeling like discomfort, like, I might get fired and, all these other people, like, I'm honest when you hire me. So, if I'm talking about whiteness or racism and all these other things, those should not come as a surprise.
Yeah. You know who you hired.
You know who you hired.
Yeah. Jessica Walsh asked, okay, now you're talking about being in the space that you are professionally now, right? Which is kind of different, tenured full professor, So she's talking about in an entry-level position where we lack authority to make large-scale change. What are ways that we can make the biggest impact to change this systemic racism that is interwoven in the structure of college campuses? So for those folks just kind of starting out in their careers.
I think it depends on who the we is, because the work looks different for what I can do versus what a white colleague can do versus what a man can do versus what a woman can do versus what, a transgender person, like there are all of these pieces. So it kind of just depends on the we, but I've always talked about, working within your sphere of influence. So by encouraging a faculty member to redo their syllabus so that it's racially just, that's their influences in the classroom. Does it shift the whole atmosphere of the campus and, change the structure? No. But it has the capacity to really shape the experience of the racially minoritized students in the classroom and, the white students in that classroom. And so to me, it's about working where your influence is. If you're in an entry-level student affairs position in the residence hall, what does your floor programming look like? What do your conversations look like? When you are an RA, like, what do you say when you notice something racist happen or someone hangs, something racist on somebody's door? What's the response to that? Is the response to just simply address the student who was harmed, which is, of course, very important, but it's, I guess, more meaningful if you're also addressing the person who perpetrated it and addressing the larger, residence hall so that they understand why something like that is problematic, why it hurts, why it's harmful, where it comes from. So I just
pretending like the rest of the hall didn't see it.
Right.
Because everyone was impacted by it. If
right. And so that, to me, it's just about, influence. Like in terms of the elections in November, I can't change how political parties spar with one another and all of that. All I know is I got to vote. So I'm going to vote, I don't envision myself running for office, but for some people that, is where they feel like they can make a change. So they run for office. So I think it's important to just think about what resources do you have at your disposal, because those are the resources that you have authority over. So I don't think anybody lacks authority or lacks power, but it's honing in on what is the power you have and how are you going to use it to, change this microcosm. Like if everybody, worked on their own sphere, then we see more of a massive change.
Yeah, because it's happening everywhere.
Right. It's happening
I think people
everywhere.
Underestimate, if you are in any type of space interacting with, working with, developing college students, I mean, that's a huge sphere of influence, because you're talking about stewardship of people.
Right. They're going to graduate, right?
Yeah.
We want them to graduate and know what it's like to be a citizen who cares for other people, who, is fundamentally committed to, the idea of community and democracy and all of these other pieces. And so you just never know, the one conversation can shift for somebody who just never got checked. They never had the conversation. No one ever told them, that they were problematic. So
yeah. If you're academic advisor, think deeply about the classes that you're encouraging them to take.
Right.
And,
right.
There's so many things that you could do without you having to be the facilitator of it.
Exactly.
Yeah. Okay. And so then now Michael Stewart, he in the article, so he looks at a quote that you had in the article, which I think is really interesting. So he references a quote that says something to the fact that even the wokest white people are starting off as recovering racists. And essentially it's talking about how everyone has been affected by racism in some way. So his question is, in today's society, particularly in youth and online culture, where it's like being described as a racist is unforgivable and about the worst thing that you could label somebody as. How do you allow for individuals to grow and change? He says, obviously, there are a few behaviors and actions that you can't be explained away with simple ignorance. But what about those who get labeled or like some type of permanent scarlet letter imposed on them for comments made when they were a teenager or a very young adult? Like, where's the line drawn between forgiving and ostracizing? I like this question because college is such a critical space of like stepping outside of what you've always known and what you've always been exposed to or taught, and growing your knowledge or your experience and your exposure, just generally growing as a person, but allowing that space for people to actually do that, to not be only who they were on Facebook their junior year in high school before they came here, that type of thing.
On one hand, I think when we're talking about, for example, white people who maybe in their past, they posted racist things on Twitter and all that other stuff. I think that's up. So forgiveness is not owed, right? It's up to the person who was harmed to decide to forgive. And whiteness is expecting forgiveness in the first place, right? That's not something Black people, like we just don't get forgiven. People still tripping off Michael Vick and those dogs. You know what I'm saying? Forgiveness is really contextual. And we've seen a lot of incidents where, a lot in the park, or, people saying, that's not me, forgive me, all these other pieces. That's up to that person. And if they want to forgive you, fine. Like, everybody is in some way, I guess, worthy of redemption and can change. Do your work and change. But your change shouldn't be contingent upon whether or not you're forgiven. If the ultimate goal is working toward forgiveness, then do the thing, continue to say you're sorry, but actions speak louder than words to me. So it's different to have said these things long ago and they pop up on your, Twitter feed and people are kind of throwing it in your face. Do you have something in the present context that refutes that shows the growth? You know what I'm saying? That shows there's a change, that shows that, you realize that those are wrong, and again, when I think about forgiveness, it's contextual. Black people don't get forgiven, not in ways that, we've been socialized to believe we need to forgive white people when they make mistakes.
Yeah. Tell me two things that have to change in order to achieve racial equity and racial justice.
One thing that has to change is our expectations. Again, we can't expect the whole universe to shift off of one good deed or, one good person and all. Like, I think we have oftentimes unrealistic expectations around change. And it's not that change can't be immediate or urgent and all these other pieces, but we're talking about a system that is,
massive. It's
this old. This is, it's really old. Like, how
like it's speaking to that point of oldness. Like, one of the things that just always grounds me, I have to always go back to, is when you think about what it is for something to last for like 250 years. So just going back to slavery. For 200, like for something hundreds of years, like not 50 years, not 75 years, but hundreds. And not one time did someone, like, people were just going along with this. They never thought that there was anything wrong with it for hundreds of years. Like, then you understand because that was extreme. And people were cool with that for hundreds of years.
Right. And doing it far more publicly, than we do it today, so to me, one thing has to be around expectations. Our institutions, if you know the history, read Ebony and Ivory, I'm an Ivy. But systems like ours, our higher education systems, all the, our money, capitalism, these things don't just change overnight. They just don't. I wish they did. But I think our expectations need to change around what change actually looks like. And understanding that, the reality, the more things change, the more they stay the same. Has there been progress? Yes. Is it where we need it to be? Absolutely not. And it's taken a long time. I mean, think about it. For Kamala Harris to be, a vice president candidate, that's something unheard of. And so it means something. And it does symbolize some aspect of change, but there's a lot, a lot that still needs to happen. So that's one thing. I think the other piece around racial justice, again, when we think about who's doing the work, it is often racially minoritized people. And we don't need saving by white people, right? We just don't need it. We need white people to save themselves. But here's the reality in that, white people gonna stay white people in. They're gonna do what they do. And so that's not to say I have lowered expectation for white people, but I'm not going to set my hopes on them changing in order for me as a Black woman to experience liberation, right? I'm not going to do it. But I do think one of those changes has to be white people stepping up. You've got to. If I see another video of some, white people walking around with guns feeling threatened when there is no imminent threat, you got a white family member who knows the truth. I want that white family member to talk to that person, say, put your gun away. Let's talk about this. Let's clarify. And so I think there's a lot of fear, unwarranted fear, by the way, that makes all of these expectations really challenging. I think the system stays as it is because people are scared for it to change without realizing the possibilities, right? Oh my goodness. There's so many possibilities if we could just kind of let go of what we believe life, society, this world to be.
Yeah. Yes. So, okay, I'm going to pull one question from the chat, and then we'll have to close. I have about, do you think one of the changes has to be more democratic system because our system is not? And I'm not gonna butcher your name. Okay. Who that comes from, but thank you for submitting that one. But yeah, so do you think it there has to be a true creation of a democratic system?
That could be one change. But even, to some level, democracy is power laden, right? It's not that I don't believe in a democratic system, but I just wonder what are the possibilities if we think beyond what we have in place. We might not even have a word for it or a language for it yet, but to me, there's just some other possibilities, some other future out there, and we haven't tapped into it.
Yeah, yeah. And that's what, like, one of the things that I've been writing about lately is how we need to transform our work in education to try to develop inventors. Um,
Yeah.
because really the core of any type of real change requires invention. People that
Hmm.
have mindsets and think
Outside
differently,
the box. Yes.
create new things. All right, so I wanted to end up this particular series comes from my love of Inside the Actor Studio.
I love it too.
And so for those that are like younger and maybe Inside the Actor Studio, I don't even know if it still comes on, but the Actor Studio was it still goes on. The Actor Studio, I think Al Pacino is president right now, but it's a space, a workshop for accomplished actors to be able to spend some time in New York and work on their craft and do it in a space where they can be actors and not be celebrities and pulled on in that way or whatever.
Hmm.
And so it was a community of like really well-established actors. And then I think it was Fordham that adopted it, and it became a part of their theater program. And so when it became a part of the theater program at the university, they developed this this large lecture course where students could just come and watch and sit in on a conversation between the professor of that course and one of the actors of the actor studio. And they would be like really famous actors. So you're sitting in and you're watching a conversation with him and Tom Cruise, or him and, you know what I'm saying, et cetera, et cetera. And so that series, the professor was James Lipton, and he ended the series with these quick fire questions that he adopted from Bernard Pivot, who was a like French scholar. And there was this list of random kind of questions that every guest in the actor studio answered. And so the faculty lounge for me is a reinterpretation of the actor studio, and inviting my colleagues in higher education to come sit in the faculty lounge and have a conversation. So I want to end our conversation with these quick fire questions in honor of Bernard Pivot and James Lipton. Okay, what's your favorite word?
Mother.
Mother. What's your least favorite word?
Hate.
What excites you professionally?
Contributing to substantive change or inspiring others.
Mm-hmm. What turns you off professionally?
Profiting off of Black pain.
What are your two favorite books dealing with race in life? Fiction or nonfiction? It's two books.
I'm going to say a more recent book I've read is Heavy by
Yes.
Kiese Layman.
Yes.
And then an older book, Sister Citizen by Melissa Harris Perry.
Okay. What is your favorite protest song?
It's a hard one. Right now, My Petition by Jill Scott.
Yes, that's on Black Lives Matter, Spotify. I listen to it a lot. What profession other than your own would you like to attempt?
Screenplay writer or filmmaker.
Oh,
I'm gonna do it. I'm gonna do it too.
Yes. What profession would you suck at?
I would say a pilot.
Okay, good. Jeanette. All right. If heaven exists, or whatever afterworld one might believe in, if you believe in an afterworld, what would you like to hear God, Allah, Ra, whoever that entity might be, what would you like to hear them say when you arrive?
I would want them to say, well done, and then to hand me a mic so I can drop it one last time.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for joining us today for this conversation.
Thank you for having me.
This video will be available on the Museum of Education's YouTube channel. So I will clean it up, edit it, and post it there. And I will try to send, if I'm able to send all of the panel, all of the attendees, the link to it so that you're able to access it. But thank you all for attending. To my class, you have time they're going to be writing some op-eds in response to this conversation.
Oh my goodness. Yes. Okay. I'm looking forward to reading.
And then I will be sending an email with just reminders and everything for this coming week. But thank you everyone for joining us today. Take care. Thank you, Lori.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye.